All right, great. Thank you all for joining today to learn about PolicyEngine overall. Again, if you're new to PolicyEngine, we are a charity that provides free open source software for simulating the effect of public policies. Um, so you can do other things with it too. You can actually go into our web app, just plug in your own household information, and we'll calculate your taxes and benefits. But a lot of what we'll show here today has to do with the ability to simulate policies, not just at a UK-wide level, but a local level with really comprehensive set of policies that are growing all the time and including childcare subsidies. So I'm here with my colleagues Nikhil Woodruff and Vahid Ahmadi. I'm Max Dennis, co-founder and CEO of PolicyEngine, and really excited to share with you some of what we're working on and see how it might facilitate even more new kind of research ideas at the frontier of economic policy. So with that, I will turn over to my colleague Nikhil to go from here.
Thanks, Max. Okay, I assume you can all see the slides at the title. Okay, cool. Yeah, so essentially today we're going to be walking through previews of two features that we're going to be rolling out kind of in beta mode now and launching in over the next sort of month, I think. For those of you who haven't come across PolicyEngine before, I think essentially what we do is we compute the impact of public policy. So we have a tax benefit model covering all major tax and benefits, enabling us to simulate costs, poverty rate changes, distributional outcomes, but also just compute things about like what is the household sector like under current law now. So I think this is a useful tool for a lot of analysis work that goes into the think tank sort of sphere in the UK. And hopefully with the features that we're rolling out today, I think these would be quite useful to analysis in general, but with some specific use cases. We'll go through local area analysis first, because I think this is quite an exciting one. Just to rehash, my name's Nikhil Woodruff, co-founder with Max and CTO. I'm based in London, and I'm here with Vahid Ahmadi, who is a research associate with us and who has also been developing a lot of these features. So just to get to the point, local area analysis. I guess, what do we mean by local area analysis? What have we built, and why is it important or useful? It's probably a good place to start. So policy in the UK, I think we're all comfortable with the fact that this is decided by people who first and foremost represent a local area, and we like to think of the sort of policy decision-making process in the UK being, people have policy goals. Those goals are often about their local areas, like you want your local area to have some properties. Voters use information to decide on which policies achieve their goals, and then vote accordingly. Policymakers have policy goals for their constituencies, and through getting information about how policy interventions affect their local areas, they decide what policies to advocate for. Which is all well and good, but the information on how policy actually affects local places is often completely missing. We have pretty good infrastructure at the national level for finding out or estimating the impact of tax benefit policy reforms. So when there's an autumn budget, we have a think tank sector that's really well set up to very quickly distill the impacts, costs, labour supply responses, poverty rate changes at the national level. But we really have effectively no infrastructure for going from there and saying, okay, well then how does it affect each constituency? And I think there is a lot of demand for that information. This is a big problem. You've got hundreds of local representatives and you've got thousands of staff focused on, advocating for or analysing local area outcomes. And I think an equivalent to this kind of method is like the MRP poll method. We've all seen MRP polls kind of take over the political analysis scene over the past decade, but we haven't really seen that same thing happen in the tax benefit analysis sphere. I think the kind of usefulness of this kind of speaks for itself. Like, imagine if you had any policy reform and you could distill the impacts down to any local area level. So I think the next thing to talk about is how can we actually do this? And just to give a brief overview of how we've been building this new tool, we're actually extending a technique that we already use. So household surveys that are kind of the bedrock of how you compute impacts for a particular local area, or like even just the nationwide impacts, those have accuracy issues. Whether it's the labour force survey or the family resources survey, surveys undercount benefits, they undercount the top income distribution. All of those kind of inaccuracies really do add up. So you have a problem. UC spending is 40 billion, let's say, in the family resources survey. That's not good, because then when we want to analyse a government policy that affects universal credit, if the survey itself doesn't really consistently line up with what the DWP has statistics on, then any analysis that we do on universal credit reforms is also going to be similarly off. So what we do is we identify reliable statistics that we trust more, so the government tells us how much it's actually spent on universal credit. And then we use machine learning to basically adjust the weights of the family resources survey in order to force it to be more consistent with the government statistics that we trust more. And then at the end of that, we have a new version of this survey, which is much more accurate, and it aligns with all of the government statistics, which is good, because then if you're doing an analysis based on the family resources survey, and it comes up with some contradictory number to a government statistic at the top level, that's not great, because then it's why is the analysis inconsistent? And we can solve that problem by forcing the surveys to be consistent with admin data. So that's what we've been doing actually for a couple of years now, and it's worked out pretty great for making more nationally accurate household data. But we've got this kind of low-hanging fruits, or relatively low-hanging fruits, where this approach doesn't necessarily just have to be for the nation. We could collect statistics for any local area and generate a version of this national household data set that is optimized to be as consistent as possible with all of these local statistics. So essentially, we're taking a national household survey and we're making 650 different versions of that are each calibrated to be consistent with all of these income, demographic, economic statistics for each local area. So we've done that for 650 constituencies and 360 different local authorities across the UK. So just to reiterate, kind of what we've built is an enhanced family resources survey, so the main household survey in the UK, and which also has imputed consumption and wealth, which we previously added, for over 1,000 local areas. So this means that we have representative data, in each of those local areas that covers the household sector with incomes, spending, wealth, taxes, and benefits. So on the app, on our public web app, which I'll go through in a little bit, we've essentially published the constituency outputs for this in beta mode. Essentially that means that you can now use the PolicyEngine tool to score policy reforms and break it down by each constituency. We've also published all the household weights, so people can use the underlying data. The actual household data, you'll need to be a researcher who signed up to the UK Data Service. But once you've got access to that, you can actually just use our data. It's open and open source. So it's not limited to just using it for PolicyEngine stuff. So I think the first thing that I'd like to show you guys is a dashboard that we've built, basically just walking through what does our data actually look like. And this is actually publicly available, so you can jump through it at the same time as me. But yeah, so we've got a dashboard where we basically let people jump through and explore what does our data say about every local area in the UK. And I'd just like to briefly mention that we do validate quite a lot. We've got a public dashboard with all 16,000 of the statistics that we've calibrated our survey to hit. Generally, we get between 0 and 15% relative errors, but over around 90% of our targets that we care about, we're less than 10% error on. So I'll just jump over on my screen. So if you go to, and I'll put this link in the chat. Okay. If you go to this dashboard, you can basically query our data for any particular local area. And I think this is kind of useful because it's kind of just separating out what we do from the reform angle and just looking at one area. So I might suggest one constituency. Let's go Guildford, and I'll go analyze area. And that's going to give me, area summary, Guildford, population, not just the electorate, the actual population, average household income, that's not per capita, that's household income before tax and benefits, and then sort of net incomes. And this is unequivalized. So we've got income, we've got consumption and wealth, and we've also got tax and benefits. So you can see sort of which taxes make up the most revenues from this constituency. And you can also look at which benefits were paid out the most. So state pension was effectively half of benefit spending for Guildford, and universal credit was about a quarter. And you can also see kind of total aggregates, income tax, national insurance, VAT for this local area that it's contributing towards the national budget. So you can kind of walk through that and interrogate it for any one of the constituencies or local authorities. And you can also compare this with any other area. So we could compare it with the United Kingdom, for example. So we can see here, for example, the income distribution for Guildford was much higher than the national average, particularly at the top end, which makes sense. And you can also see taxes paid, sort of in net form, is much higher as well, and lower benefit receipts. This makes sense for a constituency which is quite a bit sort of richer than the national average in the southeast. So yeah, would encourage people to have a play about with this and sort of interrogate it for specific local areas. But yeah, so I'm going to jump back to the slides here. And then just to go through a few use cases of how does this actually affect reform analyses? So one use case that we might have is I want to see how a policy affects my local area. So PolicyEngine, as some of you will have used before, basically lets you go in, create a policy reform, and score the outputs. Budgetary impacts, how does it affect the poverty rates, how does it affect net incomes, how many people gain, how many people lose, those kinds of things. And what we've added here is the ability to essentially not just simulate for one country as a whole, for UK or England or Scotland, but you can plug in a specific constituency and estimate the same impacts for that constituency. So let me jump in here. If I go to this screen here, and I'll actually just plug in from the start. So from the start of the web page, I'm going to go compute policy reform impacts, and then I'm going to search for a parameter. So I will, the child limits for universal credit has been in the news recently. So why don't we go to that parameter and we'll say I'm going to change the universal credit child limit to 99, so effectively abolishing it. So I'll put in 99 there and press enter. And under more options, I'm going to select a geography and I'm going to select my constituency. Oh. But in fact, first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click enable UK local areas, and then I'm going to type in Guildford. So with that selected, I'm saying I want to simulate this policy reform in Guildford over 2025, and I'm going to compare it against current law. So if I click calculate economic impact, it's going to be really quick, but in reality, it'd be more like 20 seconds. I've calculated this one before. So it's saying this policy in Guildford, costs the government 2.5 million, lowers poverty by about 7%, and increases net income for people, and essentially doesn't leave anyone worse off. So I can go down into this and see that this was because of benefit spending. I can pull out distributional impacts and see how this affects each part of Guildford's specific income decile. I can look at winners and losers by income decile, and I can also look at poverty. So I can see Guildford's poverty rate for children under this reform goes down from 19% to 16.8%. So 12%. I think this is consistent. The IFS also has 13% poverty reduction in total. So similar relative trend across the UK, as you see here. But you can also see that it affects income inequality and all of those other impacts. So that's how you could affect one specific constituency. You could plug in any of the other constituencies of the UK here. But a different use case might be, I want to see how a policy affects all areas. And I think this is probably more relevant to those of us on the call today. So instead of just selecting Guildford, I could have instead selected the UK. And now my cost is 2 billion, which is pretty similar to what others are reporting. Lowers poverty by slightly less. And what I can actually do is I can go expand this parliamentary constituencies area here and click on relative change. And that gives me a heat map of the relative change to average household net income for each of the constituencies of the UK. So if we look at which ones here have the strongest change, we've got Bradford, we've got Birmingham, essentially most of inner London is affected. The ones with the smallest impacts are places like Chelsea and Fulham, Islington North, City of London. Results that are broadly in line with, I think, what we'd expect. And you can also see average changes. So this is total increase in net income for a seat divided by total net income for that seat. And another thing you can look at is if you go into the winners and losers part, you can look at winners and losers by parliamentary constituency. So here we're saying, how many constituencies have a gain, more than 0.1%, but less than 5%. So if it's less than 0.1%, we say effectively no change. And we can see that actually in majority of seats, there is some substantial impact. Less so for places like Scotland, but pretty high for England. So those are the kind of impacts that you can pull out. I mean, any policy reform that you can plug into PolicyEngine, you can, spread over these constituencies in this way as well. And we'll shortly be launching local authorities to this page as well. So let me jump back in here. So I'm thinking about, if this is a useful feature, then what does it enable? I think there's a few ways that this is kind of useful to analysis. One is that any existing economic analysis, whether that's of a policy reform or of just the standard state of things, adding local impacts of any kind of analysis, I think, makes it more salient to people, and also more targeted towards policymakers. All news is local news somewhere, and I think local news is more salient to people. If you were to receive some information about how the autumn budget affects the UK, that's interesting. But I think it's also more interesting for people if you know how it affects your local constituency, and those two things can be added to each other. But then I think the next layer of this is using local impacts to better inform the design of reforms. Reforms that the end goal is to have some policy influence. I think knowing how a policy reform, how many seats does it represent again for, which maybe types of seats does this policy reform tend to help, what party are those seats represented by. I think these are all useful pieces of information that might sort of increase policy relevance for any kind of given policy analysis. But then finally, outside of the PolicyEngine tool, this local data is I think we're thinking of as a general tool. This is a general kind of set of new family resources surveys that we've made. And I think you could plug this local data into any other analysis. And it'd be really interesting to see what sort of extra information this can be combined with in order to generate meaningful insights for people. So yeah, I mean, just thinking of examples, things like the national net beneficiary rate. So the ONS estimates this every year, the percentage of households who have more in benefits than they pay in taxes. It could be really interesting to split this out for each local area. Or how do autumn budget national insurance reforms affect local areas split by gender? Or how would stronger national economic growth have affected each local area or each region? Or, for example, essentially not looking at reforms at all, but which local authorities have higher than average fuel poverty? I think those are all questions that this data makes it slightly easy to answer. But yeah, so I'll kind of just leave those there. But yeah, definitely, if you have any questions on the methodology or kind of the outputs here, would encourage people to raise them at the Q&A later. But yeah, with that, I think I'll pass over to Vahid.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Nikhil. For this part, we present the childcare subsidies that we're modeling in PolicyEngine. Yeah, perfect. As you may know, we have different kind of childcare subsidy program in the UK. We started with implementing tax-free childcare, then universal and extended, and also we are working on some childcare entitlement for targeted family and also for families who are students. We implemented and made documentation for these three, and we are working on the targeted and study childcare programs as well. So basically, on the documentation part, we covered the program description, the requirement, and the condition of each program. Then how we implemented this program was our approach, our parameter that we're using, and also the how we deal with the interactions of the childcare program with the other programs as well. At the end of the documentations for each part, we put some examples to how we can use that and how we can actually calculate the effect of different policies over the economic impacts and distributional impacts. Yeah. Yeah. As an example, for the tax-free childcare modeling, we project that 1.6 million children is eligible for tax-free childcare in 2025. And also, as we show here, we see that there is a kind of threshold for household income to be eligible for the tax-free childcare, and there is a kind of cliff effect, and you can see that after 100K earnings, here there is a kind of earning dead zone that after that, in the gray area, you are trying to compensate the benefit that you're losing from not being eligible for the tax-free childcare. And on the media, there is a kind of post about this kind of graph about take home pay, and also compared to the gross income. And you can see and you can explore these kind of graph in the PolicyEngine household site. Yep. Okay. Yeah, about the economic impact part of the childcare subsidies here, for the tax-free childcare program, we actually projects that this program costs government about 1.3 billion pounds in 2025. And also, if we adding the standard layer supply assumption to our modeling, adding these assumptions increases this cost by 38 million pounds. So if we go to the website and just plug in this program, we can actually see different parts, different tabs to measure the, for example, budgetary impact. Yeah, thanks, Nikhil. Yeah, as you can see here, we can walk through the different parts here. You just need to plug in the reform. I mean, for example, here is a tax-free program, and see the different effects over the regional and also the parliamentary constituency analysis that Nikhil said. We can see the average change and relative change of this program over the UK, and also see, for example, the labor supply impact and the estimation of the this program's effect over the UK. Yeah, perfect. I'll pass it again to Nikhil to continue.
Thanks, Fahid. Yeah, so I think just to reiterate, all of the modelling here, so tax-free childcare as a policy, and the other childcare subsidies and the constituencies, those are all on the web app. So parliamentary constituencies is essentially a thing we've added to any policy that you can model, and likewise that applies to tax-free childcare. So if there's a proposal to make some change to tax-free childcare, we can now split it out by constituency. So just for looking ahead, we've got some new things planned to be released later in the year as well. So finishing childcare subsidies and having those be editable on the app. We're also going to be working on estimating the in-kind value of public services using the same approach that the Treasury uses to estimate how budget changes affect the distribution of income. We'll also publish the local authority level outputs in beta on the app. And then later in the year, we've got a kind of UX-led site redesign focused around accessibility and sort of AI-powered usage as well. So those are all sort of to come. But apart from that, I'd say save the date for the next one of these trainings where we'll go through at least one of those. And yeah, I'll open it up to questions if people have them. I can see. Oh,
I'm super keen with my hand up. I can go first.
Yeah. Go next.
Thanks, guys. Firstly, I know I've been on a few meetings with you guys before and webinars too, and I'm usually the one that's extremely excited at the end based on what you've done. And today's no different. This looks amazing. I've heard lots of people try and propose sort of dashboards that can produce insight like this, and they're going to have some sort of policy analysis element added to it, and it never really materializes like this. And I kind of thought to myself that it wasn't possible. So it's fantastic just seeing this. And I just had a go in my own local area, and it's super insightful. And Nikhil knows this, but obviously, so I work for a think tank, and I'm also running in a local by-election. So this is so up my street. It couldn't be more. So congratulations on a really good project so far. I just had two quick questions. One was kind of reflecting the comments in the chat so far, which is generally how you add sort of policy features to this. I guess the trade-off whenever you have a micro-simulation model that is so user-friendly and well-designed to enable people to go in and choose specific policies, that you sort of lose that kind of flexibility in adding sort of more blue sky thinking policies. So just wondering about how you think of that. I think the answer is potentially in the Python code that maybe you're able to get access to. I don't know, but anyway, that'd be just generally interesting. And second, somewhat relatedly, um, I'm always generally quite interested in sort of economic shocks and how those distribute and then relate back as well. So I was quite interested in your use case example of growth at the sort of local level, what it means for people. That would be absolutely fantastic to be able to just see that, what would happen if we had better growth tomorrow? What would that look like at the household and regional level? So I just don't know how that works with it's called PolicyEngine, not economic shock engine, but I was just wondering, yeah, like how that works with sort of those economic factors down to these sort of levels. But anyway, yeah, congrats again. This is a really cool tool.
Thanks. Yeah, so just if I understand the questions correctly, so yeah, one is how do we, what's the process that we use for adding new policy parameters to the model, and like what's the process just in general for using the model with policies that you can't just represent as the parameters that we have on here.
Yeah, but also like, is it possible for the user to add something? Probably not, but be interested to see if that may be something that you could do in the future.
Yeah, so there is a Python interface, and every policy that am I still sharing my screen? Yeah, okay, cool. Every policy that you run through the model, there is a Python interface that will reproduce these results. And I think probably in a future session, we'll go through how to actually use the Python interface. But what you can do as part of this is not just play about with reforms, but it's, pull up the child tax credit variable and, put in new code for how you compute child tax credit. So like, you could, users could essentially put in any kind of structural reform, as we call them, where you're literally changing the logic of how something works rather than just changing one of the input parameters. So that is possible. I mean, happy to go for it with anyone who wants to, but I think we'll probably also dedicate one of these sessions to using that. So yeah, Sarah, to your example, like the child, limiting the number of universal credit child elements to 2 children, but with specific conditions about the parents would be an example of where you need to use the structural reform. I think we'll add that specific one pretty shortly, given the sort of policy relevance. But for other kind of structural reforms like that, I mean, someone would need to use the Python package. We're going to do it, but like people who have other ideas that we don't think of, I think we want to make sure that people are comfortable using the Python package and can do that on their own without needing to talk to us, because we'll probably slow stuff down. And sorry, on the second one, you've got, let me see if
Actually, I saw Sarah come off mute, so should
yeah.
Yeah, no, it was just to add on the 2-child limit, because obviously that was, I think it was just trialed yesterday even, or a couple of days ago, and we would be very interested to be able to model those different kind of rumors that are being, like, solutions that are being rumored the government is considering. Yes, so I was wondering as Max if there's an option to add those in the system, but you've already mentioned that it's through the Python code. But I'm afraid I'm not an expert on Python, so that would be very useful for me. But I would be interested in like this future session that you mentioned, that you would go through that and how to do that. Yeah, in the meantime, if that's something that you're looking at including, then we'd be really keen to work with you guys on that.
Yeah, likewise, and that's useful to know. So yeah, we'll be adding the 2-child limit sort of specification sort of as soon as we can, I think. So yeah, we'll be keen to sort of chat further about that, because I think we've got like gender-based kind of poverty breakdowns and things like that as well. So that might be interesting to have a look at.
I would just add, yeah, so we, in general, are pretty well resourced to make sure we cover the laws as they change, and also some of the highest priority, highest profile reforms are being discussed. We're always, available to, provide services for technical assistance to organizations that want some more hand-holding, and we could also, that could involve training. We can just do the reform and sort of put it in the web app. So always open to conversations about additional services like that.
It's brilliant. Thank you, Max.
Thank you. Yeah, and Max, just to come back to, sorry, Max mostly, just to come back to your second question on things like economic growth. So we do have parameters in the model that aren't just policy parameters. We have like average earnings as an index. So if I share my, I'm still sharing my screen. Let me jump over to this. So for example, I could put in a policy where I've got a folder here. We like to organize our policies by government department, and one of those is the OBR. So we've got consumer price index, and we've got average earnings index. So these values are from the latest OBR forecast. So one of the things you could do here is you could plug in the earnings index for average earnings. 2025, it's this, and I could increase it by 40%. So you could at the moment, sure, there are more structural reforms that would be more useful, but like you could, if you wanted to, double earnings in the model and have that be the policy reform that you're analyzing. And so if you go over to that, then you've got the effects on tax revenues, but you've also got now, I mean, this chart looks really nice. You've got like £13,000 like benefit to these constituencies. So yeah, we do have some kind of like purely economic parameters here as well. But yeah, if you have ideas for things that we could add that would be useful to you specifically, keen to add those as well. I think we have a question from Dylan. Is it possible to introduce new policies into the system, for example, a carbon tax on home heat? So, yeah, so I think that may be covered by the kind of structural reform feature that we're happy to provide training on and things like that. But just on that specific example, we do have in the model a carbon tax, not on home heat, but just sort of in general based on imputed carbon consumption. So it's been a while since I think we've used this one, but you could put like a £100 per ton price on carbon and sort of see how that affects people. So might take...
what does that actually change? Which sectors of the economy, what use cases are you actually putting that carbon tax on?
So essentially, the carbon tax here that we have in the model is like, how the UK calculates the national carbon footprint?
Yeah.
It's each household's contribution to the carbon footprint we're imposing a £100 fine on. So it's probably slightly disconnected from like specific fines on specific industries, but it's broadly aligned with like the impacts of a carbon tax. So here, if I jump over here,
when you're saying carbon footprint, this is the DEFRA data on consumption emissions, not the DESNAS data on territorial emissions?
Yes, consumption based. We basically look at people's consumption, and we have a carbon intensity of each spending category. So you have food has a ton CO2 per pound spent, and that's different from the ton CO2 per pound spent on transport, which is different from per pound spent on fuel. So we use people's consumption data to get that, and you've got, as expected. I mean, consumption tax slightly sort of regressive as a percentage of income. Probably some. Oh yeah, doesn't affect the poverty definition of income, so it wouldn't affect government poverty rates. But we could look at this by constituency. Actually, that might be interesting. Okay, so more in Scotland. That's interesting.
And sorry, would how would I be able to dig in? Essentially, dig in and understand exactly what the model is tweaking, or like what it's charging.
Wait, sorry, could you repeat the question?
Basically, if I want to understand exactly what the underlying data is the model's using to build this, and e.g., what are they charging on fuel, petrol and clothes and all that kind of a thing, would it show me, or is that sort of opaque?
That one, you might be better off going to the model documentation. So I'll put a link for that. We've also got it here. And you can also see, I mean, we've got a fair amount of documentation in the model source code itself, which is open source. But I mean, yeah, happy to walk through the model as well.
No, okay, yeah, we can take it offline, but thank you.
Cool. Cool, and thanks, yeah, public services spending. I agree, hopefully. So we're following the same approach as the Treasury does on public service spending. So we're essentially kind of just open sourcing the same methodology that they use to be consistent. So yeah, we'll come on to that when we finally manage to finish it. But yeah. I think with that, I'll probably pass it back to Max if he's there. Unless we've lost Max, actually.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think there's a ton of stuff here. If there are no more questions, we can probably call it there. But thanks for the really useful questions, guys. And yeah, we'll be keen to follow up individually with people who are interested or sort of have requests or questions or things like that. We'll post an update about the 2-child limit things. I think we've got everyone's emails from the sign-up list. So if you don't mind hearing about 2-child limit stuff, then we'll post that update. But yeah, apart from that, thanks for your time, everyone.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. This was
Thanks.
really
Well
good.
done again.
Thank you.
Thanks.
The Max